Okay. We're recording. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Satchel. I am the Lower Inlet Community Organizer for Cook Inlet Keeper, and Homer Drawdown is supported by Cook Inlet Keeper and Catchment Bay Conservation Society and Alaskan Snow Climate Change. It's a sub-program there. And so far, it's been sort of organized and directed by a really dedicated steering committee of myself, Bjorn from Catchment Bay Conservation Society, Zoe Kramer and Dale Banks, and recently, as we've selected our solution, Kim McNett. And yeah, so this has been a really collaborative process of organizational support with awesome dedicated volunteers. And we're really excited to be moving into this next phase where we can really expand ownership of this project and have a more just like community owned and directed climate solution that we're all working towards. And tonight's the first meeting where we're going to dig into our selected climate solution. Last meeting, we democratically chose peatland conservation, restoration, and education, and really uplifting that and the importance of peatlands in our community and to our land managers and decision makers and landowners as it relates to climate change mitigation. And I think I'll stop here to acknowledge that we're going to be talking over the next year a lot about land and how we value the land and whose land is whose land, who owns what, and who gets to decide how we manage that land. And it's really important to keep in our minds and sort of at the front of all of this that we're on unceded land. We're on Dena'ina unceded land. And the colonial system that claimed that land from the Dena'ina people is a really foundational pillar of the systems that are perpetuating climate change today. And so it's important to see those connections and acknowledge the past harm that we are collectively trying to repair. And I hope that through this project, we can actually spend some time learning about Indigenous land management practices and really just like thinking about the land with a much bigger context than we normally do, more historically accurate and with a different way of how we value it. So with that, we'll pivot into peatlands, peatland management. So we'll acknowledge that our that our solution is very open-ended at this point of time. Peatland restoration, conservation, education is a really exciting goal, and I'm excited to start communicating it to the public, but definitely the first couple meetings at least is going to be spent really fine-tuning and brainstorming and learning what will be the most effective use of our collective energy in achieving that goal, and what project is achievable over the next year, and what will have a lot of roles for all of us to contribute to it. And and what's going to have an impact? How are we going to really make sure that our work is effective? So we're going to be diving into that today, and we're gonna learn from the collective knowledge base in the room and have some bigger group discussions about project ideas, and then we can from there go into breakout rooms about projects that are kind of correlate with the projects that you're most excited about. And hopefully by the end of this meeting, we'll have some better ideas that we can research in the interim between now and our next meeting. And pretty soon we'll be able to articulate exactly what we're going to do. But that's going to be a community process to get there. And and I'm gonna unshare your screen, Anna. I think you're only accidentally doing this, although I don't really know how to do that. Yeah, I'm gonna transition, and so I can kind of figure out how to unshare Anna's screen and help you unshare your screen, because I'm not sure how to do that. But I'm gonna pass it over to Kim, who's going to lead us into our next part of the meeting. Perfect. Okay, wonderful.
Unmute myself. Okay, thank you so much, Satchel, for that great introduction. So peatlands are these incredibly effective carbon sinks and storehouses. And with such an extensive area of local peatlands, our community has a very unique opportunity for land use management in the effort to draw down carbon. There are many aspects, strategies, and dynamics when considering a peatland community project. So at this early stage in our planning process, it will be worthwhile for us to consider and look into a variety of approaches to determine what's feasible to achieve with our collective resources and efforts. So we have many specialists here at this meeting that have knowledge and inspirations regarding peatland management, conservation, education, and more. So at this time, as a group, we need to put our heads together and consider our options and where our enthusiasm lies as well. So the goal for this meeting is not to take a deep dive into any one subject or topic, but to sort of scratch the surface on many of them, divide ourselves and do homework over the next month to see what community efforts could show potential. So we've roughly lumped topics into the following categories, though there are overlaps and confusions, but we've put them in conservation related, restoration, and education/outreach related topics. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes in a group discussion surrounding each of these umbrella categories. So if you have background knowledge and contributions that you think will be meaningful, please do chime in and offer your insights. After we go through these three discussion blocks, we'll have a break, and then afterwards we'll do a breakout rooms like Satchel suggested. So I will introduce these umbrella topics and the different categories that we've sort of put into them. So please correct me if I misspeak on anything. So starting with conservation, we have land acquisitions. So this would be the purchasing of lands with the goal of protecting peatland from human disturbance, bearing in mind that protecting lands from human development may not necessarily ensure that peatlands will be protected from other forces of nature, such as drying, ecological regime shifts, or wildfires. There are zoning and regulations of peatlands. So locally, if the peatlands are very unregulated, whereas private landowners may drain them dry or remove peat from the surface for activities such as gravel mining. Similarly, there may not be any zoning incentives that would encourage peatland conservation within the city of Homer or otherwise. And then I want to just mention the Ketchimak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve's efforts to get local Kenai lowland peatlands on the global blue carbon market. So in this case, large area landowners could sell their peatlands at a profit to preserve them. And then there's also this concept of advocating and appealing to larger entities for peatland conservation. So now we can open it up to discussion, and it's going to need to be brief. I think we have about 10 minutes, but is there anyone here that wishes to speak to the category of peatland conservation and preservation?
Hey, everybody. This is Willie Dunn. Thanks, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces and really glad you guys are getting together. And I also see a number of folks here from the borough, the brand new Resilience and Security Advisory Commission. And I think as far as peatland conservation, there's going to be a really good opportunity to network with that new commission. Also see the land manager from the borough on board here, possibly helping identify peat underlying them. And I think that could be a really good first step and a project that the new commission might be willing to discuss, identifying peatlands in preparation for potential conservation projects, either land designations or sale on the blue carbon market or any of those things. So anyway, as most of you know, I'm on the Borough Assembly, and I'm really happy to work with you guys on that. And Waterman and Higman also from the Resilience and Security Commission. So that's just wanted to throw that.
Kim, I'd love to throw something in too, if that's okay. So I'm Marie McCarty. I'm from the Land Trust. I'm the director of the Land Trust. And the Reserve and the Land Trust and a bunch of others have been working on a bunch of blue carbon proposals over the last couple of years, with the Reserve in the lead. And the Reserve is, because Kui's not here, so, oh, but Jacob is. So Jacob, jump in and
I'm here, Marie.
correct me if I get this wrong. Oh, there you go. Sorry. Hi, Kui. You can talk about your part then.
I was having trouble connecting.
Oh, okay. So anyways, so we've been working together for a couple of years on trying to put together a project where the Reserve will help figure out how much carbon is stored in peatlands. And then the Land Trust will work with the Reserve to try to figure out how to work on a blue carbon market, in a blue carbon market, so that landowners on the peninsula have incentives to preserve their important peatlands. And so we love that you guys, I mean, Kui, I'm cheering for both of us, or our teams, because we're really excited about this opportunity to network with a whole bunch of folks. Some of the solution is, some of it is legislation. I love that all the pieces can come together in this. So thanks for picking this one.
Yeah, can I follow on that? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, I have a little bit unstable internet. So just to kind of build off of what Willie and Marie and Kim have already shared, let you guys know the Reserve has been doing a few things. First of all, learning about the carbon market, the blue carbon market. What there is a potential, there are other peatland carbon projects now worldwide. There's a couple, one in Indonesia and one in Belarus. So there's some precedents there. Jacob, who's on the line here, has been working to do some volume assessments, which is one of the things you have to know, like how much is there, right? And then we currently have an intern, and we're working with a group called Sylvestrum Climate Associates, which they do carbon project development all over the world, not just peatlands, but other types of carbon projects. And we're doing like a feasibility. So in other words, to have a carbon project, we have to show that we're avoiding impacts. And so that we have to look at like, what are the past impacts and what are the projected impacts? And real briefly, a current effort, I'm actually writing a proposal right now that I'm hoping to get out to folks for review, primarily working with the largest landowners in the region. So that would be the Borough, the state, Siri, and the Nilchik tribe. Those are the big landowners. And the reason for that is that if we can build a carbon project with those big landowners, it'll be easy for smaller landowners to opt into it, apparently. So, and what we're trying to do is to come up with kind of an economic framework. So in other words, include the full value of these peatlands, not just, you know, as if they're just land, but also the services that they provide for salmon stream support, for climate potential mitigation, flood control, just all kind of groundwater recharge. And the reason for that is because that'll be a more realistic framework for people to make decisions about whether or not they want to enter in a carbon market if they understand the full suite of kind of ecosystem services. So I'd be happy to go into more detail at any time, but I just wanted the group to know that there's some work being done in the, you know, on this topic, and there's a lot of potential. I think communication is really important. It's a complex topic, but if we can figure out how to communicate it, you know, to a lot of people in a way that is meaningful, I think it'll really help, you know, carry the message and help people get on board with it.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that too. Anna Liljedahl here. And I'm supporting Kui in her proposal writing work. And I wanted to mention, so you know, that both Kui and I, and there might be more people here on the call too, we're working for research institutions or academic institutions, and we have ability to apply for grants and such and get money to actually come up with climate solutions. So I think that's, I'm here listening to see what people are interested in and maybe find, do a match between either funders or private donors and raise some money to do something really cool and neat here on the Homer and Kenai Peninsula that can serve as a pilot for other places in the country and the state.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing? I think it's important for people to know that groundwater is really important to peatlands, of course, right? Recharging, providing water to keep those peatlands wet, and also peatlands are one of the areas where groundwater is recharged into regional aquifers, and we are doing some work in groundwater vulnerability modeling as well. So just so people know that work is going on. You reminded me, Anna, because of the potential other things that can be brought in. Yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to bring more to this table.
Yeah, could I jump in here a bit?
And I have one last little thing, if that's okay. Oh. Go Ed, go.
Okay, great. Well, it's really terrific to see everybody here and hear about what's going on. I'm particularly glad to see Willie and Marcus here from the borough, because I really think we need to take a Kenai Peninsula broad approach and not just focus on Kachemak Bay. By far and away, the largest landowner, of course, is the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. And that's where the majority of the peatlands are located. So I think, we should try and include them in any collaborative efforts that we have. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is finding out how much carbon we have tied up in the peatlands here. And I know Jacob has started some work on that, and I'd like to hear more about that. But we have something on the order of, I think, 500,000 acres of wetlands, probably most of which would be, have a peat substrate. So there's a tremendous amount of carbon stored here in the Kenai Peninsula. And we need to know, at what risk is it of burning? Peat can burn quite deep, and peat fires can burn for years, for that matter. In Indonesia, several years ago, if you remember, Borneo and places like that, there were tremendous peatland fires there that dumped an enormous amount of carbon into the fire. So, we've got plenty of fires on the Kenai Peninsula. The landscape is drying, the peatlands are drying out, and we have the potential for a whole lot more fire with a drying climate. So fire management policies could be shaped, at the refuge and at the state level there with state forestry. And we could prioritize the protection of peatlands so that they only burned under wet conditions. They're being invaded by black spruce. They will burn, but ideally only the spruce burns off and the peat is preserved. So, these are things that we both need more information on, from a research point of view, but we also need to expand our collaboration and try and include the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge in this.
Ed, I appreciate that. I just wanted to also add that we are actually working with the Kenai Refuge, particularly with the concept of keeping peats, exploring ways to keep peatlands inundated, and particularly through beaver, potentially beaver reintroductions. So there has been some work there with the refuge, with John. Even though he retired, he's still working.
Right, I'm aware of that.
All right, Kim, do you want to move us into the next category for
Yes,
another
that was
12 to 15 minutes?
a perfect segue into our next category, which is restoration. And under of the topics we can discuss in restoration, beaver activity, but also beaver dam analogs for wetland restoration. So beavers provide this valuable ecological service by keeping landscapes wet. And as we know now, for peatlands to work, they need to remain wet. So by mimicking beaver behavior, humans can create vegetative barriers and drainages that help the landscapes retain water. Habitats then become more desirable for beavers, which could then take over the work that is initially done by people. This is a particularly exciting project idea, which I personally could envision us taking on. And there are increasing numbers of case studies for this as an effective form of wetland restoration. And there's even a guidebook for constructing beaver analog dams. In this section, I also included things that may or may not be directly related to restoration, but citizen science monitoring and research project assistance. How can we help with these? Could we mention groundwater monitoring? Ed spoke a bit about fire management strategies to keep wetlands from, or peatlands from burning. So now we can open it up to discussion. So is there anyone here that wants to speak directly on the restoration of wetland and peatland habitat? And is John Morton here? I haven't seen his.
I just sent him a message to see if he would chime in, but no response.
Well, I might jump in a bit. John would be better prepared to speak on this because I know he's been interested in beavers for a long time, and we'd certainly like to get some back on the refuge. But from a practical point of view, the beaver dams, let's put it this way, much of the refuge, or much of the Kenai lowland is very flat and very poorly drained. You look at lots of the wetlands and you're hard pressed to say, exactly where is the water going. So, okay, they're drying out. That's because of warmer summers and increased evapotranspiration and somewhat less precip. That's easy enough to see. But in terms of actually, where to put a dam that would raise the water level in these wetlands, that's going to take some careful study. I could think of maybe a couple places where that could be done because streams have incised down through the peat, but in most places, there's just kind of sheet flow over these wetlands. There's not well-defined drainage patterns. So we got a practical problem there about the beaver dam concept.
So Ed, we've been working, John and I have been working together to pilot this idea and to find suitable locations to test this idea out. So, all those things that you mentioned are absolutely right. And, but at least from preliminary GIS surveys, not insurmountable.
I would just interject that on a broad scale, like the numbers are really big when we're looking at peat, right? There's a lot of peat around. If you just tally up how much carbon is in that, how much carbon of it might leave, the changes in carbon if you change practices in a given place, those numbers are all likely to be pretty big. If you were to, and so I think that really bears on like the point that Ed brings up, because if you look at the whole problem of loss of peat mass on the Kenai lowlands, and you say I want to take the largest chunk out of that, that's challenging, and maybe fire management or something like that might be one of the better ways to go. If you want to say like I want to take a number of different approaches, and each of those I want to be really valuable, I want them to be significant on the scale of the sort of the amount of emissions that any of us might have influence over. Well, even if we can change the mass balance of peat for just 5% of the peaty lowlands, peaty Kenai lowlands, that might be a lot. And I would want to see all those numbers kind of laid out to really, as a basis for that discussion. And I think it bears kind of thinking about that. I wanted to also just add a couple just geomorphologist perspectives on beaver dams. So I've been around peat quite a bit. I don't know beavers individually really well, but I've been around beaver dams a bit, and I've also seen kind of the geomorphic trace of those on the landscape. And one of the things that I think might be non-intuitive, but if you get wood below water level, it becomes peat, just like all this other stuff. So if you drive a stake into, and it stays below water level, you can go and find that same stake completely intact. I've literally found, archaeological stakes that are thousands of years old. So, so when we talk about like going out there and doing some goofy little dam on the landscape, it might sound like a really temporary thing, but some of these things might actually persist for not just a few decades, but a few centuries or even millennia. And so that's something I think anyway you could easily miss. And I've been through landscapes where you see peat or you see beaver dams that have giant trees growing on top of them, where there might be one little section of the beaver dam that's very active, and you can see the beaver's been working hard at it. But it is many, many, many generations of beavers that have built that whole dam system that completely changes the geomorphology of the streams and such in that area. They become accumulation areas where other sediment can accumulate as well, and you just end up with a really different system, which is also a note of caution too. I mean, you're really maybe playing with something pretty powerful when you start changing the hydrology in that way. So anyway, that's my comment.
Can I go ahead and ask if about the brush and the brushification, and if there are any manipulation strategies regarding encroaching brush that people are aware of, or if that would be a potential restoration method forward? Essentially, I'm asking like if there's these vegetation regime shifts that are occurring, are there, human volunteer related efforts that we could do that might redirect those ecosystem changes, like such as clearing brush? I really don't know the answer to this. I'm putting it out there to see if anybody has any insight.
I mean, maybe an alternate
Can I
question.
just ask a clarifying question as far as the brush goes? Because my understanding is that brush is it's a cause and a symptom of drying. So first, it's a symptom of drying, like it's drying out so trees can now live where they couldn't live before. It was too wet previously. Now it is drying so they can live there. And then they take up more water and they amplify the drying. I just want to get that. Is that the way that it works?
My understanding is that's correct, yes. That both those things occur. And this also has to do with how snowpack interacts with the landscape. So it's not just the water table, but snowpack too. And I would just to maybe reframe Kim's question, or an alternate framing for Kim's question would be, could we, let's say we take brush munchers out there and we start mowing down alders, like how, is that something we want to measure? Is that something we want to say, and I was wondering about looking at HEA's easements where they clear brush from some of those. Could we look at those as a historic evidence of what effects that does have? Because I don't know. I mean, it'd be nice to, if we were thinking about doing that, it'd be nice to have some sense that it worked and how well it worked.
It could be good to ask a forester. There's John Winters here in town. There's Matt James at the Homer Soil and Water District. There's a couple guys up in Kenai. All these guys have a lot of experience with that forestry level of work here on the Kenai Peninsula. And like, I know Matt's been at it for about 30 years. So, what have they been seeing?
So I'm a hydrologist, and I haven't worked on the Kenai wetlands, but just thinking about the tundra, and the studies that I've done on the tundra, which is peatland as well, there's no difference in the evapotranspiration between shrub tundra and the tussock tundra. And they're the same. Because it's both. You're just shifting the water from evaporating to transpiring. So because the shrubs are also shading the ground as well. So I think there's more studies that could be done there. And a thought I had on restoration, I'm just thinking of when I drive out to my land, there's a lot of ATV tracks that are messed up the wetlands. And when you destroy the living vegetation, you stop the carbon, the flux of carbon into the ground. So perhaps that could be a way where people actually can get together and make it so people do not drive on the wetlands or protect them. Because I'd be curious, to study like what impact that disturbance has on the carbon balance, because it doesn't matter if the water table is high then if there's no plans to take up that carbon and put it in the ground. Yeah, and the channels, they create channels too, exactly, the tracks.
This is Seal, and I'm kind of new to the whole subject, but a couple of things. And so I've been diving in and reading some research and talking with John, who's on our board, and various things, trying to kind of get up to speed on the whole project and ideas. And a couple of things that have jumped out to me. One is that all peatlands are not the same. There's a classification that recently got finished up, that, and Ed will know more about this. There's something like 8 different classifications of peatlands, and they range in how much carbon they sequester based on pH. So we might want to be aware of some of the fine nuances of different peatlands having different values as far as sequestration. And then another thing that we talked about was there's still pretty heavy trapping of beaver on the refuge in particular, and I'm not sure beyond that. But there might be some potential for getting, reduced trapping, which would allow the beaver populations to expand, or, at least grow beyond where they are right now. And then another question that I have as an evolutionary biologist is, what's the historical picture for beaver interactions with peatlands on the Kenai? And, what can we learn from that? And I'm thinking about, like Ed was talking about, some of the sort of challenges of the topography, and how it'd be interesting to see how beavers interact with that landscape, which probably doesn't fit what you see in the lower 48. So those are just some questions that are kind of mulling around in my head.
It's possible that somebody like Ed knows better than me, but I wish John was here because he would answer this. But in speaking with him, apparently historically there were way higher numbers of beavers here on the Lower Kenai Peninsula. Yeah, we were talking about that today, and they have data going back, I believe, less than 100 years. But there might be other ways to get evidence that go back even further, like, my nerdy mind thinks in thousands of years and tens of thousands of years. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of evidence might be out there for, paleo type data.
Well, I guess just following up something that Higgs said, some of those beaver dams, from what I've seen, not necessarily in the peatlands around here, but elsewhere, they're abandoned, but they're still there. So I wonder how, if you can see old beaver dams and how many you can see, et cetera.
That's a really good point. It might be worth doing some inventory on existing dams that have been abandoned. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Well, I've heard John mention the figure that in the distant past, the trapping records would indicate that we had like 5 times as many beavers on the refuges we have today.
Yeah, right. But I'm thinking that probably still reflects the numbers post trapping, because there was heavy trapping in the 1800s. So that's something to think about too, as far as populations being hit really hard initially, probably by the Russians coming through. But yeah, I think that's a good number to start with.
Interesting to ask the archaeologists, because I know beaver, I think bones or teeth have been found in some of the archaeological digs.
Okay.
But I don't recall them being a major, food item or whatever in those digs. And I don't recall that I've ever seen any studies, paleo studies on beavers. I mean, there are a few dendrochronology studies that have been done on them, but pre-settlement
Yeah, I guess that would be the more relevant data set, wouldn't it? Just be prior to the big trapping event to see what was, prior to settlement, white settlement.
Yeah. Well, I think we have the habitat to support a lot of beavers because we have all these hardwood trees. I mean, especially north of the Kenai River, so many more aspens and cottonwoods and birch and things like that that the beavers just love. I mean, the beavers don't particularly like conifers. They'll gnaw one down in a pinch, but they really like the good birch. And there's really a lot of that. And we have all these lakes. I mean, you fly over the Northern Kenai Refuge and it's, just one lake after another. So it is a terrific beaver habitat.
Yeah, it does. It seems like this Shangri-La for beavers. So they probably would come right back if they weren't trapped so heavily.
Well, that's been assigned to be the timekeeper here. So we need to move on to our last category, Kim, of education and outreach for another 15 minutes. Then we'll take a break.
Great, thanks, Dale. Awesome discussion, everybody, too. I really appreciate all of those thoughts. So I see some people have been sort of discussing this in the chat box. That's great. So for education and outreach, I actually have quite a lot of subjects that I put under this. One of those would be engaging private landowners. So many peatlands are on privately owned lands. So potentially a citizen effort could be made by those individuals to protect or enhance the peatlands on their properties, or just have an awareness of the benefits of them. Also in this category, I put fundraising strategies. So what are some creative ways to get funding? Some ideas have already been mentioned here. And then also, where would that funding potentially be useful and where could it go? We have environmental education programs. I think that was a lot of what people were chatting about in the box there. Networking, because we have a lot of stakeholders in the lower Kenai that could relate to peatlands, landowners. There's the Security and Resiliency Advisory Commission that Willie already mentioned. So like being a facilitator to bring all of these different people together and see if there's some synergistic efforts that could be made. And then we also have the potential for artwork and other efforts that just raise public awareness of the significance and importance of peatlands. So with that said, does anybody want to speak to education, outreach, or any of these other topics or new ones that I forgot to mention? I might call on Katie Gavanis if she's present.
Yes, yeah, I am. I was gonna let other people go first, but I'm happy to just say there's been some conversation in the chat about this, and I know Coastal Studies is really excited about any sort of education with K-12 students and college students, as well as community members, about the importance of peatlands, both as it relates to climate change, but then also all the ecosystem services we've been talking about, and just how cool they are as ecosystems, right? There's like this fascinating, there's carnivorous plants there and things that are preserved for thousands of years. So they're really amazing learning places. And so, I think there's a lot of potential there for some pretty cool explorations. And I would love to talk more about these possibilities. We worked with quite a few people, including the Land Trust and the Research Reserve and CUI, to do sort of a trial pilot program this fall with middle schoolers, where we took them kind of from the uplands to the bench and then across the bay and called it Through the Watershed. And it was, super fun. It was a real small group, but it was very hands-on, and looked at both the science as well as kind of the human aspects of land use and conservation. And we're able to have some pretty cool conversations with middle schoolers. So definitely lots of possibilities for expanding that. And Rika, I see, the Kachemak Currents. It is on my list to do peatlands for Kachemak Currents. I'm waiting to hear from you all when the best time to do it is. So those Saturday segments. But we're really happy to be involved in whatever way, and I think there's a ton of possibilities about peatlands. I am definitely a huge proponent of getting people outside and onto the peatlands as much as possible, without damaging them, of course, but really trying to figure out how do we get people out there to see how special these ecosystems are.
Katie, I'd love to. Oh,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I'd love to follow up on that because in my little mind, I can imagine a relatively small piece of land, or big, relatively close to town, where coastal studies in the reserve and everybody brings people, you guys bring people to see people doing science. The environmental educators can go, and you know, and it's just a place where you can touch and feel and smell. And you can, and you know, there can be a citizen science component to it where you can do all of that stuff and watch people, or you can actually go do it. So it's a piece of land that, right? I mean, and it can be part of the bigger picture of how we protect peatlands, but it could be an easy, you know, just buying land and protecting it. It's easy thing to do that could be a community resource that would be just a perfect drawdown thing, because it would bring all of us together with all of our skill sets and let us all work together to bring the community together. So that's my, you know, and there can be artwork, there can be environmental ed. We all can raise money because we're all so good at that. There can be citizen science. If it's the right piece, we can figure out the beaver thing. I don't know. Anyways, that's I'll stop talking, but that's my vision. And I love the idea that the community can see the scientists trying to figure out how to quantify carbon. How cool is that? So, okay, with that, I'm going to be quiet, but.
Yeah, I think citizen science is a great connection in here, right? I mean, if we can actually, you know, if we have objectives that, you know, can be supported by citizen scientists, obviously, like maybe you accomplish something directly with that, maybe learn something about other parts of the system. That also means that people are out there, they're engaged, and they're learning about things. And some of those people may well be or know landowners who can then, you know, or then learning from that. And maybe it's more effective than, you know, telling people, especially Alaskans, what they should do, which is fairly often not very effective. So, yeah.
I want to say, hopefully, maybe if it was already said, I got kicked off for a minute. So if this is already said, please stop me. But this notion of education outreach that I've been kind of thinking on is if we were to choose a pathway of, you know, conservation or preservation, and created this kind of clear channel with the land trust, and identified, you know, some property that we could see as really valuable, and, you know, then be working towards trying to acquire our own funds to preserve it, that a voluntary and very loosey-goosey carbon offset could be established. And the real benefit of the education and outreach component of it is that you would be, you know, like I say, this is, at this point, it's very loosey-goosey because we don't have the, you know, the hard numbers, which maybe hopefully the research reserve will be able to provide at some point, of, you know, how much is stored and how much, you know, when you divide that by a dollar amount, how much does it cost to preserve 1 ton? But on the voluntary carbon market, the projects are usually range between like $5 and $10 a ton. So we could just, in the meantime, choose some loosey-goosey number, you know, whatever.
Adopt a ton, right? You could adopt a ton.
Right, adopt a ton. And the real outreach component comes, I think, really in our tourist, you know, industry, that, you know, we get people, and it's, you know, like, it's just such a clear connection with, you know, salmon charter, you know, fleet, but, you know, any others. So you say, you know, here is this project that we're doing to, you know, sequester carbon and keep it in the ground. Would you, as a tourist visiting our state, like to help preserve, you know, you can sell it as salmon habitat even more than the carbon sequestration, but it's a complete package, you know, that you would be trying to get across to people. So that's something that I've been kind of thinking about.
I have one other little quick piece, is that you could do this here and then you could do it across the borough. Soldotna could have their own community drawdown thing on peatlands, and if this works, you know, Kenai could, Seward could, Cooper Landing could. Okay, I really am gonna be quiet now. Hold on.
I really
Yeah, and
love.
across the state, really, there's a lot of peatlands in Alaska, and that is kind of one of the exciting aspects of choosing this as a community project. Is it could potentially be an inception point for other communities across the state.
I'd like to take and shine a spotlight on the importance of education. So I serve as the land manager for the Kenai Peninsula Borough, and it occurs to me that land management at the borough level is driven by values. And so any ways in which education is raising awareness of values of resources, that's going to translate into land management actions, and it could possibly translate into policy actions. When we manage land, it's all values based, and those values are sometimes monetary, a lot of times not. I know that on the Kenai Peninsula, campaigns like Salmon Love Wetlands, that has an effect when I'm in discussions with the Planning Commissioner or Assembly about conservation of wetlands. It's not a big lift because that education background has already been laid. And so I think that this is a really good focus area.
I just wanted to make a comment about possibly including in the outreach and education some of the towns here on the south side of the bay, like Soldovia and Port Graham. Particularly, there are the native corporations around here are large landowners and already have experience doing carbon offset type programs in forests. And I don't know how aware they are of the possibility of wetlands being part of that, and just doing something like it. Soldovia's Healthy Chatter would be an obvious one here. I don't know about Port Graham, but that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, Namwalik too.
And Namwalik too, yeah.
We've worked with Tyonek too. They have a lot of peatlands, similar landscape, and we actually had their seniors and or I guess upper high school students come over, and it's great to take them out, core these peatlands, have them feel how cool they are, and talk about stream habitat, support for salmon streams. They really got a lot out of it, and then we were able to go there and kind of have them lead us in their into their peatlands and talk about salmon habitat support. So I think you guys are absolutely right. There's a lot of potential to share and to learn from each other and to export what's done here, and also, learn from other people. And also, just to follow up on what you said with the native, Siri is one of the biggest landowners. And so really making sure that we connect with them. We've talked with them about having interns, and then having those interns report back to the shareholders on, in terms of peatland volumes and, interest in carbon. And the Nilchik Traditional Council also, manages, most of the Nilchik watershed is, under their management stewardship authority. And so, I just want to make sure that we think about these other entities which are very interested and are managing peatlands already.
Julie, I'm just curious, does the Nilchik include the Anchor River?
No, they don't have much land in the Anchor River watershed.
Okay, who does own most of that?
Siri owns a lot of the headwaters in the Anchor River. So Siri, Borough, and State DNR owns a lot of those landscape, those headwater areas anyway.
Okay. Because it's a non-glacial, so they could actually benefit maybe even more.
Yes, yeah, and we have a lot of information on the peatlands of the what we call the Kenai lowland watersheds, which is the Anchor, Storiski, Deep Creek, and the Nilchik rivers. And the watershed, the landscape in those watersheds is primarily privately owned, or privately owned. There's a little bit of public land, but those public lands, I should say, there's a fair amount of public lands, but those public lands are not protected.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Katie mentioned something in the chat about learning about cultural stewardship practices and values relating to peatlands. And I think that, you know, speaking about Satchel's introduction on acknowledging that these are traditional indigenous lands and this is a land use project. Does anybody have any other, we have already talked about networking. So obviously some first steps would be doing some reaching out to people and learning, but I just kind of wanted to create some airspace for that.
Well, that makes me think too about what Ed was talking about for fire management, because I know indigenous people, I don't know about Alaska specific, but doing controlled burning is often a management strategy that we could possibly incorporate based on local practices. So I think that's a great idea. Because I'm really worried about what Ed said about the fire potential.
And then the Ninilchik River too, just being a very large, you know, drainage way, potential area to, you know, interface with and work within.
So we have a project that we don't know if we have funding yet, but we're hoping to, which is working with the Ninilchik Traditional Council and to map both traditional ecological knowledge along with the Western science in a mapping framework, and then also do field trips with the land trust too, and involving storytelling and just communicating in different ways about how landscapes, including peatlands, are supporting salmon, and also doing artistic visioning for stewardship in the future. So I'm super excited about it, but we don't know if we're going to get the funding for it. But if we do, if it's successful, it would make a great kind of entry point for learning and sharing some of the stuff that we're talking about.
So it's about time for us to take our break, but I think Satchel, I think I might let you describe. We're going to split up into peat pods, breakout groups called peat pods, and there's going to be some choice in the matter. So Satchel?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, maybe it was, I'll say what I need to say, but Kim, you can fill in the dots. There's a lot of really great sort of like general ideas, and we want to give you guys more discussion time to really focus on project, like turning those ideas into achievable project level actions. And so we wanted to split you into breakout groups for that, for that task, because it's a little bit easier to like have engaging conversation when there's less people in the room. We have planned to do the breakout groups by category. So if you're excited about some of the projects in the conservation discussion, you could go into that breakout group. If you're excited about some of the projects in the restoration discussion, you could go into that breakout room. And if you're excited about education, go into that breakout room. And I think, and I think that in your breakout rooms, you can discuss what you're really excited to talk about. And so if it strays a little bit from the overarching category, that's okay. But if you know specifically what breakout room you would like to go to during the break or before the break, please like drop into the chat what room you want to be in, and I will be creating those rooms during the break. We're gonna have a 5-minute break coming up, but I'll let Kim jump in too with any other thoughts.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think it's a good idea to choose your room before your break, and then Satchel can kind of situate you. I just want to say that just because you choose one of these rooms does not confine you to only looking into that project over the next month. But since we are now in our action phase of Drawdown, I just want to kind of try to help frame this a little bit. So, these are complex subjects. Our goal in these breakout rooms is not to like come up with answers right now, but rather to delegate next step actions to various members within that group or groups of individuals. So consider what questions we need answers to, who we should reach out to, what kinds of potential roadblocks may come up, and what sort of project trajectories we could go down. Then during the next month, our group will sort of spread out and seek feasibility and potential of these options, so that we can kind of land on a more focused project in the near future. So our ultimate project may, include a combination of these issues. We may choose to put our efforts all behind one, but it will almost certainly be containing a public outreach and education component. I could say that much right now. But so at the beginning of your breakout groups, start by identifying a note taker. And then before the breakout ends, generate a list of actions that can be taken within the next month, even if that's just acquiring more information, and what persons or groups of people are assigned to those tasks. And I also want to say that keep in mind that rubric, and maybe it could get dropped in the chat, but we had a rubric when we were looking at the different champions of all the various projects, that we kind of graded the effectiveness or the feasibility and the political feasibility and the inclusivity and all of these other aspects. So not necessarily in your breakout group, but over the next month, as we all start moving this forward, I think it's important to keep those criteria in mind. And yeah, thank you all. I think that worked really well. I'm glad. I really appreciate everybody's insightful contributions to that discussion.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We had some good conversations. I'm excited to hear about them. I don't know why I always get the job where I don't get to go into the breakout rooms.
I'll be the tech person next time, Satchel.
Okay. Cool. I think Dale is going to take on moderating our shareback portion.
I guess I am. So we have, I don't know, about like 6 or 7 minutes for each area to sort of report back, and hopefully you've found some tasks for people to follow up with for the next month, and that's what we all want to hear about. We had a really good discussion in our group, and I'm sure each one was similar. So how about unless Kim had anything to add to that, I mean, I don't know if specifically if there's anything, Kim, that you wanted to hear, or just kind of what I said. Where are you, Kim?
Oh yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, just kind of a recap from each group would be awesome.
Okay. Yeah, more or less a recap and what you're going to do in the next month, and then we'll kind of sum it up at the end. So let's start with education and outreach. Who was the note taker and person that wants to report, or a couple of you can if you'd like.
Well, I took the notes and we talked about quite a bit. The main points boiling down to, we have some larger questions like what are alternatives for peats in the gardens, and what does peat harvesting in the Kenai Peninsula Borough look like here? Is it sustainable? Is it harming? Is it working towards any way or another? We have a lot of questions as to what that looks like. And then we were talking about having arts and visuals and highlighting exactly what peatlands do. And Becca and Karen were saying having a mascot, Pete the Beaver, and having that be put into some fun art projects, and reaching out to the Ninilchik tribe and to different educational programs who are currently working towards this exact thing, and partnering with them and making our education collaborative. So it really boiled down to, we, the education group, want to support whatever bigger projects come out of this. And so we're going to try to be a part of the other peat pods and kind of support your guys' work and help you create outreach and education for those subjects. Sorry, if I missed anything, go ahead and chime in, guys.
You may have just said it really fast, Zoe, so I might have missed it. But I think we also talked quite a bit about the idea of a loose carbon offset as a pretty impressive educational component that also could help to get some things done.
I think a big overarching theme is that different groups in our community need a different message. because everybody won't be receptive to the same message. So really trying to hone in on what the groups are and delivering the message that they're going to hear.
That's smart.
Yeah, can I just add
Yep.
to that thought you had back there, that if that's the case, then there should be some similar, if, you know, the messaging being tailored to different groups is a great idea, but there should be some sort of cohesive look to it or theme to it so that it's not completely disparate.
Eat the beaver.
Yeah, that's actually something we didn't talk about, but that, you know, I'm you know, I've become increasingly aware of is, you know, branding. And it would be really good, I think, for our, you know, the education outreach group to really kind of put a lot of thought into that, you know, before we unveil something, and to really give it, you know, a real fine once over. And we've got so many great artists and great talent to pull from to help us kind of really, you know, try to find something that resonates and that is memorable and that, you know, yeah.
We have a member of our community who has been behind the Smokey the Bear promotion for years. It'd be interesting to reach out to him and figure out kind of what the brainchild of that Smokey the Bear and the far-reaching, you know, reach that he has with that.
Cool. Is there anything else to report from that group?
I think that it's fine, you know, if we want to just kind of pass the torch, because I think that, you know, a lot of what we're going to do is dependent on these other two things, and that, you know, we're going to come up with our own independent strategies, but it'll really kind of depend on what the ultimate kind of project is, you know. So we're, in a way, we're kind of waiting for some, you know, cues from the other pods.
Okay. Maybe we should move to conservation next. Who's the spokesperson?
I took notes. I can try to do a quick summary, and the folks that were more talkative can jump in and fill in blanks. I felt that the conversation was really surrounding a couple of different things. The need to determine how much carbon is being stored in the peatlands on the Kenai, and then be able to assess the value of that carbon. And that is going to be a really important communication tool in trying to talk to a lot of the larger landowners on the peninsula. Also, the importance then of, kind of goes hand in hand with this, is mapping the peninsula's peatlands, so that we can, you know, create that assessment in time. It sounds like the Research Reserve has started doing some probing of peatlands to try and start getting some representative samples of how deep they go, which is, of course, an imperative step into figuring out how much total carbon is being stored there. And another big part of the conversation was kind of along the lines of what's our goal? What's our scale? Are we trying to protect a whole bunch of land, specifically in the scope of this project? Or are we trying to focus in on a specific parcel that's maybe closer to Homer and more accessible to a lot of different groups and organizations, and try to use that as a sort of home base for learning, education, and outreach? And if whomever might like to add to that, please do.
There was also a question of whether to work top down or bottom up. And it was concluded that top down oftentimes becomes a failure because people don't like to be directed, and that education and getting that information to build up to the top, then the top can weigh in. So I think we concluded that bottom building from the bottom up would be good.
And part of that building from the bottom up, one of the ideas that was mentioned was that the whole blue carbon market strategy that's been mentioned before, with potentially getting the tourists in on it, and having that in hand to be able to bring. So if you've got that, and then there's a campaign publicly to generate more knowledge about peatland and how valuable it is to our real lives, that having all that in tow makes it easier to try to talk to the borough or to large landowners. That was part of the conversation too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did you guys have any specific tasks that you're going to look into in more depth here in the next month?
One task is that I'm going to reach out probably to the realtors, but just to get an assessment, kind of lock down what's available that's for sale right now that's peatland, and what those values are. And so I think that means cold calling realtors and asking them to share some information about lands that might have peat, and then looking at the parcel viewer and getting a better sense of it and kind of mapping that out with its values, just something to have in hand.
I'm going to provide some information about zoning within the city of Homer and some land use ideas for wetlands and peatlands.
Right.
I'm going to research kind of local peat mining that's already happening and try to establish what companies are actively taking peat out of the ground and what they might be doing with it and what value they might be ascribing to that.
Great.
In the education
I'm
realm,
gonna-
we're just hoping not to alienate those people also, because often they are working in agriculture, which is, you know, a positive thing for us. So maybe encouraging them not to export our peat. I mean, what effect does just moving the peat have? Like if we're just moving it from Acre Point and putting it in our gardens in Homer, like how does that affect?
It's not good.
The carbon neutralization, it's not good, but what is that quantity compared to large scale peat devastation and like not wanting to alienate them basically for the education component?
Well, that sounds like a good thing to look into, Becca. Try to
Also
quantify
just,
that in some way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. Like if you have question, like let's all go like seek information and bring it back to the group.
And
I
Jacob had mentioned that somebody in their organization was currently having a research study about that.
Yeah.
And
So
I think
part
one
of
more
that
thing, just
was-
real quick before we jump away from that one, would be, you know, that when we're asking the question of is it, you know, what are the parameters of sustainable harvest for local gardeners using local peat? And that one of the questions that then gets thrown in there also is that if it's not being produced locally, but farmers are still going to be demanding it, and it is coming from out of state, you know, out of the country, you know, like that, then there's going to be also that to consider too. In that, I think it's worth considering.
All right. That sounds good. You guys have a lot of things. Caressa, did you have one more quick thing? Then we need to move on.
I just say that was a great point to Bjorn about the whole take away the local supply, and because you can go buy it at the wagon wheel, and how is that much better?
All right.
I just want to say one more action item or thing for our group was just like some of these specialists like Kui and Rika and Anna just providing like resources and connectivity and progress on things that they're already working on.
Awesome. All right. Let's hear from Restoration.
I guess I was the one taking notes, so I'll go here. We kind of talked about two different types of things. One is, you know, restoration, things like artificial beaver dams and that kind of thing on existing peatlands that might need it, and also the potential for restoring human impacted areas like gravel pits and the ponds and gravel pits. And a lot of our conversation is kind of started with what do we need to figure out? Like, what do we need to know about sites to know whether they're good targets for restoration? And that kind of led us to thinking about, can we then implement some kind of citizen science protocols to go out and look at those things? And a lot of the tasks we ended up assigning people were basically to do a lot of background research on those things, and also some looking at land access for potential experimental plots, and we talked a little bit also about the fact that it's about to be winter, and maybe that it's a good time right now for a couple people in our group to go poke around at peatlands before they're completely covered by snow. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yeah. Oh, you go.
Oh, I was just gonna name some names that Seal was kind of taking a lot of leadership on the ecology. I was with Aaron's help, like going to look at some of the sort of engineering quantification ends, and Neil was going to be kind of a nexus for information on citizen science or ideas about citizen science. What am I forgetting?
I think Kevin and Melise were going to go poke around at wetlands, and Louis was going to figure out more about land, gravel pit, and
water access. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would add is that we also see a need to understand more about the different types of peat and what their relative value is in terms of carbon sequestration. So I agreed to do a little bit of digging into that. I think that's it.
If Louis finds any really good gravel pits for it, I want to go and fill one of those lakes full of cardboard boxes and then grow peat on top of it. So just so you all.
Sounds like permafrost. I mean permaculture.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well from my perspective from that group. So that was short and sweet. Are there? That's all three, and then I think what's next is Bjorn's going to talk about what's next.
And
right?
before that, I don't know if it's me or Bjorn first, but I was going to introduce Slack and talk about kind of the main ways to use it and why it's such a great tool and will help us organize ourselves so much better and allow us to collaborate and communicate in a really effective and streamlined manner. So
I would say go ahead. Yeah, that
okay.
Timing's right.
Cool. Well, let me share my screen. It is looking weird. Let's see if this works. Oh, I have to open system preferences. What is this? I got a new laptop and it's a little wonky. Gotta use my finger password. Okay, let's see if that works. Haha, okay. Share. So, how to Slack. So, Slack is incredible for so many different reasons, but I think the number one reason is it's incredibly customizable. Depending on where exactly you want to be, how you want it to look, you can do so much with this. So if you're not already on our Slack page, I will put a link in after I'm done talking about it, and it's super easy to set up an account. It takes a couple seconds, and I would suggest you download the desktop app on your computer because it's much easier to use than the browser version. So on Homer Drawdown, we have channels, which is the main meat of Slack. And as you can see, I don't have a lot of channels open. We do have a lot of channels from our previous section, which is all the chapters. I left those groups so they weren't clogging up my channels, but another way to organize them is to just go to For Peat's Sake, or we're going to be creating more channels now that we have our Peat pods, and just star it. And that when you, my cat's meowing, and when you star it, it'll be in easy access for you. Okay, what you can do in those channels is even cooler. So let me move you guys over here. You can share anything from your Google Drive or your computer, any slideshows or presentations or any links. I've been seeing a lot of amazing resource sharing. You can react with emojis and create threads, which are larger conversations on the issues and topics, and you can share your resources within those threads. Just incredible organization. So how you create a channel, everyone can do it. You go either over to here and click the button right there, or you go to add channels, create a new channel. You can name it restoration, or if you want to be more specific, you could name it, let's see, you could name it citizen science, things like that, those smaller peat pods. So I would suggest we create the 3 big groups and then we can branch off from there. And then you can add people personally, or you can just go to channels, click browse channels, and then you can join any of the channels on our Slack group. Another amazing thing that I just figured out today was you can join a Zoom group so easily from here. So if you add, there's this little apps thing up here, you can add all kinds of things. You can have polls, you can have your calendar and your Google Drive connected, but you can also have Zoom connected, where you can go to any one of your channels and do /Zoom, and it creates a Zoom call instantly, and you can join it and you can invite other people, and it's like instantaneous Zoomage. So if you're not super Zoom savvy, then that's a great way to do that. Oh yeah, my last thing is it's super customizable. So if you go right here and go to preferences, you can change when you get notifications, you can put in keywords. So if you want to be included into every time somebody mentions Peat or something more specific, you can just do Peat, and then you will always have that notification. You can change your sidebar. You can make it bright. I prefer it dark because my eyes. And you can also make it bigger or smaller, as well as just a bunch of other things, including choosing to update your status or pause notifications if you're on a Zoom call. So those are the main aspects of Slack. And if you have any further questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Zoe, is that the app or the browser?
That is the app.
Okay.
Can I also just add that you can direct message people within there?
Yes.
Too? And you can tag people by putting an @ and then their name. So if you have like an article that you were talking about that topic with somebody, you want to make sure that they see it, you can say, hey, @Rika, I found this thing, and then they'll be alerted to that.
Yes, great point. I do not know how to stop sharing. My computer. Oh wait, haha, there he is. Yes, private messaging and collaborating with people is incredibly easy on Slack.
I think of it as just a different way of it's a similar option, but a little better than email. Like it's a way of having threads and communicating with different people in the group, but not having it become this total like chaos that looks like my email.
Yeah, I think we all know what that's like.
It's really important to categorize things clearly, though, because I know it's easy to get too many channels going that you don't know where to go to find a specific thing. So maybe having a key or something.
Yeah, I would think that maybe I would hesitate to just encourage people to create their own channels until like we really have reasons to separate those conversations for now anyway. And keep them within their, little groups that we've already kind of designated for the time being anyway, until something expands and needs its own space. But the fact that you can comment directly to, like, say somebody shares an article within a channel, well, you can comment directly to that article, creates a sidebar thread that relates specifically to that article, and then you can go down to the next conversation and comment directly to that. So rather than an email that's just like a continuous, like, you know, page format, and you have to mentally keep everything organized, it's really effective that way.
And I will go ahead and create those 3 channels, and I showed you guys how to add yourself to those channels, and then you can star them.
I can eat too.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe. So well, basically, first of all, thank you all for attending tonight, and definitely a big shout out to all of the peatland experts for your valuable insights. We're really hoping that you'll stay with us, and if you don't, that at the very least you'll stay you know, in our orbit and be people that we can call upon when we have tough questions that need answers. And so before the next December meeting, which is on the 17th, the Thursday, 17th, hopefully that works out for everyone and it's far enough away from the main holidays. We're hoping, you know, I think it's been said several times, but that, you know, we're hoping that each Peat pod can take it upon themselves to meet up and kind of flesh out some of these ideas better. And then you know, be ready to kind of report back to the main group, you know, about where we're all kind of going. And you know, I think that it's going to be important that we do figure out how to stay in touch as things kind of come to light. And so, you know, creating that Slack account and familiarizing yourself with stuff that's already there is going to be, you know, hopefully we're really kind of putting our eggs in that communication, you know, tool basket. And so one other tidbit here, I actually didn't realize that until just getting Zoe's presentation, that the Zoom works directly from from Slack, but Cooking the Keeper is also getting a new Zoom account that will be more broad scale, be able to be used by us, you know, anybody. And so if you want to use that Zoom account, reach out to Satchel. Sometimes she'll get you lined out with how to be an administrator for it. And then, was there another note? Yeah, those were kind of the main things that I wanted to say before signing off. You know, one of the things that we did during our, when we were doing kind of like our book club session is, you know, offering an opportunity at the end of these meetings, if anybody had any non-Homer Drawdown related climate, you know, tidbits of news or whatever to share. So, you know, we're only 8 minutes over schedule. So if anybody has any quick little shout out they'd like to give. And well, the other thing that I would say is that, you know, so last month was the very first Resilience and Security Commission meeting. Those are open to the public. They're they keep the announcements on the borough's website, and so if anybody would like to attend those, I think they really are encouraging and hopeful that, you know, that the public stays involved. So please be on the lookout for that, and we'll try to include that in the email. Oh yeah, one other thing that we didn't talk about how we would do this, but we will take it upon ourselves to send an email from Homer Drawdown's Gmail account to each of the Peat Pod groups with everybody else's emails, so you can connect with each other. Yeah, and
I guess I would just want to add, in addition to the Resilience and Security Commission meetings, we also have Homer Electric Association meetings, which you can't do Zoom, you got to call in, but we take member comments at the beginning of each one. So if anybody wants to talk about renewable electricity or net metering, or just listen to what we're talking about, we hardly ever get members. A few of you on this have actually done that, and more is good.
Great point. And so Erin, do you find out when the monthly meetings are on a
The
Tuesday night?
second Tuesday of every, it's the second Tuesday. So in December, that is, let me just check my calendar because I don't remember off the top of my head. The 8th, December 8th.
Yep.
And I can send people the call-in information.
Well, this has been so great. Thank you all. Unless anybody else has anything else they would offer, I will say good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Everybody.
Thank
you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.